Welcome to part 6 of the video series on how I constructed this arts and crafts style round table. This video focuses on the assembly of the table and how having a true through mortise and tenon joint differs from using loose tenon joinery. First up is the assembly of the authentic table. Now I've masked off the outside of the legs where the through tenon will come through so I don't get any glue in this area. I apply yellow glue to the part of the tenon that will be inside of the leg only. I'm going to assemble the table in two halves. So after getting this joint tight, I'll install one half of the upper cross member, but I won't glue it in. This is just to keep everything square and aligned while that lower joint cures. Before I assemble the two halves of the table, I'm going to pin the through mortise and tenon joint. At the drill press, I'll drill a 3/8 inch hole, not all the way through the leg, but deep enough that when I insert a dowel, it locks the tenon in place. A little bit of yellow glue, and hammer in the dowel, and then trim it flush and sand it, and that's all there is to it. This tenon will be locked in place with that leg forever. The pinned mortise and tenon joint is a hallmark of arts and crafts furniture. Now that the two halves have dried, I can assemble them. This involves interlocking the lower cross members as well as gluing in and interlocking the upper cross members. During my dry fit, I marked each dovetail with the corresponding socket, and now when it's time to glue it up, I'll make sure each dovetail gets back in the right place. I only need a couple of clamps to complete this assembly, one on the lower cross member and one on the upper cross member. Now I'm going to show you how loose tenon joinery can simplify the assembly. First I need to make some loose tenon stock. This involves planing some stock to the thickness of the mortise, rounding off all four corners, and then cutting them to length on the table saw. What I like about working with loose tenon joinery is it's easy to fine-tune the loose tenon if it's too snug. At the belt sander, I'll take a little bit off, test the fit, until I'm satisfied with the perfect fit between the loose tenon and the mortise. I took a different approach assembling the imposter table. I decided to assemble the whole thing at once. I glue loose tenons into the legs and then apply glue into the mortise of the lower cross member and then clamp this assembly together. I'll take two halves and assemble the lower cross member with glue. I have to work quickly, but after getting the lower in, I can glue and clamp the upper cross member in place as well. The stub tenons require a little bit more clamping. We'll have clamps going across the joint as well as clamps going down to hold them into the legs. And just like the other table, I've marked the location of all the pieces during a successful dry fit so they go back together exactly where they came from. This really gives you confidence during your assembly to know that things are going to go back exactly like your dry fit. So I apply clamping pressure across and down on the upper cross members. With the table assembly dry, now it's time to pin the joint where the lower cross members intersect. I've made a simple doweling jig that clamps to the lower cross members and will help guide my drill bit. I use a right angle attachment on the cordless drill to drill down into both cross members, where I'll insert a dowel that will lock these two cross members in place. It's exposed joinery details like this that give arts and crafts furniture its beauty and strength. Since the imposter table was assembled all at one time, I didn't have the luxury of using the drill press when the table was still in two halves to drill the holes that would pin the tenons. So I've made this simple little jig that will locate the hole and guide my drill bit on each leg. And I'm not drilling all the way through the leg, just deep enough to where the pin will go through the leg and into the tenon and lock the tenon in place. Now it's time to make the plugs that will fill that shallow mortise on the outside of the imposter leg and make it look like it has a true through tenon. So I'll chamfer off the edges on all four sides of a piece of stock that's the same thickness as that mortise. Then I'll cut off the very end at the table saw, and it's this portion with the chamfer that will get inserted into that shallow mortise. I use sandpaper and fine-tune the plug a little bit so it has a perfect fit in the shallow mortise. I glue this plug in place and with clamping pressure seat it all the way into the shallow mortise. Using this method for a fake through tenon will ensure that the illusion is very real. This joint should be indistinguishable from the real thing. If you're not ready to tackle the true through mortise and tenon joint, I think loose tenon joinery with the fake through tenon is a good alternative. It's plenty strong and it's easier to make. I add my maker's mark to the upper cross member where it would be visible if you flipped over the table, but it's still somewhat concealed. The last remaining step before the finish goes on is to drill pilot holes to secure the top to the base. It's just a matter of centering the base on the top and making sure that the grain is oriented the right way. If you recall, we drilled the oblong holes in the upper cross members to allow for expansion and contraction. So I need to orient the top so that the cross grain goes with those oblong holes. Well, that does it for this part of the video, but I invite you to check out the all-new Eagle Lake Woodworking to see the rest of the videos in this series and videos on other woodworking topics. You can access all parts of the videos in one easy viewer. Check out the photo galleries of in-process work, measured drawings, and finished projects. You can also download files associated with projects. So check it out at www.eaglelakewoodworking.com.